Hi everyone, it's Ileana and I have a card to share with you today. This card is definitely a labor of love for someone that you are very grateful for. It is very time consuming because of all the watercoloring. First, I am prepping my Arches cold press watercolor paper with my embossing bag. It will eliminate any static, but for some reason with this watercolor paper, it didn't really help much. I am inking up the Circle Doodle background stamp from Simon Says Stamp with some Delicata Celestial Copper pigment ink. I re-ink this and stamp multiple times because of the texture of the watercolor paper, so it takes a few presses with the MISTI to get the impression onto the paper. And when I'm finally happy with it, I will clean up my stamp, and I'm using my stamp chamois. And here's something that I'm just going to share with you that I'm going to try and see how it works out. I took a DIY Distress ink pad. It's one of those that doesn't have any ink on it, and what I did was I added some stamp cleaner to it. So I created my own handheld stamp cleaner. So hopefully it'll work out for me, and I'll let you know how it turns out. But I just thought it would be something easy to try. Now I'm taking my Hero Arts copper embossing powder, and I am going to clean up any strays with a small dry brush. And it takes a little while for me to do this, so I did edit that part out, but I basically just spent some time cleaning up the stray embossing powder. I'm going to melt the embossing powder with my heat gun, and it does take a while for some reason. I'm not sure if maybe the paper takes a while, but the gun was hot and it just took a little while, a little longer than normal, I thought. Now that everything is done, I am going to take out my Mission watercolors, and I am going to be using a silver brush in a number 6. And I'm just going to go briefly over what colors I used, and you can just color them in whatever pattern. First, I'm going to start with the little circles in the middle with yellow ochre. And this is good practice with your watercolor brush. And it does take some time. So I just had a TV show playing and I just was taking my time, and it was really relaxing. Okay, so for the outer ring of the doodle circles, I'm going to go with Van Dyke Brown, and I wanted those to be consistent, so the center was always that shade of yellow, and then the outer circle was the Van Dyke Brown, and then the ones in between could be a combination of whatever, but I just thought that it was a little bit easier for me to not get confused on what colors to go with. And now I'm going to be moving on to the red brown, and I did dilute a lot of the color, the pigment down with some water. I tried to be consistent with which colors went where, but after a while it got a little too tedious, and some of the circle doodles are smaller than others, and so I just did my best. So the next color I am going to do is the raw umber, and it turns out to be a kind of a light tan in a way, and I'm going to use this later on to put my sentiment on. I tried not to mix colors, but I had to soften this red color here. It was a little too bright, and I wanted it to be more of a fall muted color, and so I mixed some light red with the burnt umber and created more of a rust color. And if you plan to do this, you want to make sure that you mix enough of the color so that if you run out, you might not be able to recreate that color. So be sure you create enough of that shade to cover the entire area that you're coloring in. So I didn't show the rest of the coloring because I used the same colors. I just ended up doing different rings with each color, so you kind of get the point. Now I am cutting out, I cut down a piece of the copper foil paper from Stamping Up, and I cut out the Grateful Sentiment, also by Simon Says Stamp. And because of the little holes that are in the die, it kind of leaves marks on your paper. And so I'm using my bone folder to brayer those out, or just to rub them out. I did use the little piece of leftover paper to do the yellow ochre color, but I didn't really like the way it looked. And so I'm going to flip that paper over, and I'm going to use that Van Dyke Brown. Oh, yeah, I use Van Dyke Brown, not the other one. And I watered it down quite a bit so that I could have a lighter color. And I'm just adding a good coat of the wash. And then I'm going to heat this up just because I'm in a hurry. I did the majority of my watercoloring the night before, and I let it dry overnight. And then I'm just finishing my card the next morning. So I'm checking to see if which one I like best, and I'm going to go with the light brown. And I want to stamp Grateful for You, and I'm using the Altenew Penned Rose stamp set, and I'm going to do some selective stamping. I don't want to worry about only inking part of the stamp. I don't want to cut my stamp. And so I'm just going to do just something that I do quite a bit, just so that I don't have to worry about anything. I'm going to mount my stamp onto the lid of my MISTI. I'm going to take a piece of plastic. You could use a transparency, a piece of vellum, something clear, just so that you could see. And I'm going to stamp this in Stamping Up Baked Brown Sugar. Now I'm taking a piece of Post-it and I'm sliding it underneath the plastic where the word just would be. And so now I could freely stamp my entire, I could ink up the entire stamp and not worry about masking anything off. So it's just a little trick. I hope you understand what I was talking about, but I'm sure you could see from the video what I did. Now I'm adding some liquid multi-matte medium to the back of my Grateful stamp. I didn't want to add adhesive like some Elizabeth Craft tape to the back of that because I didn't want it to be too thick, and then it would be harder to brayer the dots out. I'm just using an acrylic block to hold down the die cut while it dries. And now I'm going to trim down my sentiment strip. It's a little bit too wide. I want to be able to see more of the pattern in the back, and I know that you're going to see a lot of the pattern, but I just wanted it to be a little narrower. And once I have everything trimmed, now I'm going to adhere everything to my card. Now, I just wanted you to see the difference between the copper paper from the die cuts with the view and the Stamping Up one. And the ton also has a washi that is the same shade as the Stamping Up copper paper, so you could always use that too. Now I'm just adding some adhesive to a craft piece of cardstock. And I'm just going to add that small piece of foil. It's just the leftover strip that I cut to make my die cut. You don't want to run the entire piece of foiled cardstock in your Big Shot because you'll get an impression from your cutting mats onto your cardstock. I'm going to add a lot of foam adhesive to the back of my panel because it's watercolor paper. You don't really need it, but I don't like my my watercolor paper to sag. The watercolor paper is very thick and it didn't warp at all. So I'm just going to use my MISTI to put this on so that it's perfectly straight. And I need to take the foam insert because there's foam underneath. I need the bigger bigger space to add this on. And then once I get that on, I'll remove all of the paper, all of the backing off the foam. And I'm just going to add my sentiment. I'm going to use my T-square ruler and line it up so that it's nice and straight. Now, if you don't have any of the copper foil paper or tape, then you could just create your own with the embossing powder. So here's a close-up of the card. Thanks so much for watching, and I appreciate your patience on this video. Be sure to give it a thumbs up if you like it, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a great day.